Welcome to the Funnel Reboot podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. This episode, we're taking a look back at the past year of guests on Funnel Reboot, what they feel is most important in marketing, and where they think we're going next. Before we get to that, if you're hearing this in early 2023 and your website uses Google Analytics, you're aware Universal Analytics is being retired in June. The new Google Analytics 4 interface doesn't have reports like the old UA did, leading you to think that you have to remake all of your reports in it. But there is another way you can do this that especially helps you if you're in B2B. Google gives you access to the raw data feed, which you can merge with your other marketing systems to tell how the whole funnel is working. Now, you're the best person to set this up, but you don't have to do it alone. I've reduced the process down to something you can do at an in-person 2-day workshop. You'll fully migrate all of your old UA settings and implement Google's stack of tools to get your dashboards built. Now, I'm continuing to run these GA Fast Forward workshops. I've got them in Montreal, Kingston, and Ottawa. They'll also be run in New York, Vermont, and shortly coming to Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. You can go now and see all the details by going to gafastforward.com, either with the number 4 in the middle or all spelled out. Now we're going to dive right into the show. What we heard from guests centered around 5 themes this year. The topmost one I heard was the popularity of analytics. It's everywhere now. Now this is tumbling out of the pandemic and the fact that we noticed so much information was available to us everywhere we looked. And in marketing, there has been debate about how much data we have. Certain data is undeniably going away through changes made by Apple as well as Google. This is a short-term blip. Part of why this personally identifiable information is going away is our fault, as we took advantage of what we could in the early days of the internet. And Kevin Hartman sets this in a big enough timescale for us to see that overall, we have more than enough of the data that we really need to do our jobs.
And at the top of that pyramid that was this tremendously valuable personal level data, those data are still available and still tremendously valuable when we can tie data back to a specific customer, a specific person, how they react to certain influences. That is tremendously insightful for a marketer. What has changed is that top of the pyramid has really been blown off. We have so much data now that can be tied back to an individual consumer, to the point that finally regulation is starting to catch up with some of the practices that have been allowed to sort of spawn because of this great opportunity. And now we're facing cookie deprecation, and we're facing reactions in the market from Apple and others that are starting to force marketers and advertisers who are using those data to use them in a much more responsible, transparent way.
Just as Kevin explained how we are using data that is available from our ads on the internet, as well as organic and social reach that we have, we had Janet Driscoll Miller explain to us about the data that we hold on to. She highlighted the first-party data that is scattered around our organizations, which we can use, provided we are willing to secure access to that information.
So the first thing you have to know is what is it I really want to know, right? What's the outcome? What do I really want to understand? What kind of information do I want to get? And from there, you have to say to yourself, well, what data gives me that education of what's going on? And once you know which data pieces you need, you'll realize immediately as a marketer, you don't own all those things. Like, for instance, you probably as a marketer don't own the system that tells you how much revenue we generated. That may not be in your marketing automation tool. It may not be, again, syncing back. You may need to be able to tap into something like the accounting system. You're definitely going to need access to CRM data to find out things like how many opportunities were generated from that campaign, or how many closed won versus closed lost deals came from those campaigns that you generated.
Moving past the point when we have access to that information, it also matters what format we store the data in. Eric Boissonneau tells us that we ought to move past keeping the data in spreadsheets. You should hear how he ties together the charting and dashboarding side of this with the tool or tools that we should be using to hold on to our data.
They had all those different Google Sheets laying around with sales data, with CRM data, or like outreach data, and it was all spread in different places. And since Google Data Studio is part of the Google ecosystem, you have natively the possibility to connect to other Google tools. The real power comes when you connect it to Google BigQuery, which is a data warehouse, and now the fun begins.
The fun that Eric is talking about is getting answers from the data. Now, I don't want to mislead you. Those answers aren't just presented directly by the data. And Keith Perhack came on to talk about how we won't necessarily get the answers, but that data will give us something that leads us to those answers. His example shows how we need to be an active participant in the choice that we're confronted with by the data.
Data does not give you the answer of what the solution is. It gives you the question that you then need to answer. The data did not tell me what I need to do with the webinar. All it told me was who are people who resonate with the webinar and people who don't. What are the outliers that I need to focus on? So the people who are doing great, awesome. The segments that are turning into customers and making me buco bucks, awesome. Let's stick with that. The ones that aren't, we have to make a decision. Are they failing because they are bad customers who are not going to be useful for our company that we don't want to target? Or are we failing them in the way that we are positioning and talking about our solution? There are huge segments of your audience that would be a good fit if you knew how to talk to them correctly. And that's what data does.
The next theme that was apparent from the conversations had this year was how to translate that data into dollars. We have a dizzying array of different things that we can do to generate awareness and action from our prospects. The real question is how we manage the money we're given to delivering the best results possible. The tactics we choose informs us on how we should optimize, no doubt, but there's a drawback to relying on a certain tactic as our performance workhorse. Kevin Deeney explains how this cuts both ways and why we must bear this in mind as we present numbers to the C-suite.
Initially, it's like, got to figure out what works at all. And then when you figure that out, you kind of refine it. I like to call it cannonballing, because instead of like predictable shooting and stuff, you're basically like, look, I just got to hit the target. So I'm just going to fire away with the biggest thing I can to hit the target. And then after that, I'm going to get more precise, get more targeted, get more specific, more personalized, things like that. So the thing is, there's a detrimental balance toward refining and make something work better. But it's also going to lock you in, meaning you're going to get better along whatever it's trying to achieve. Like you might be like, look, I just want more of these type of leads. And over time, you're going to optimize your campaign and it's going to get better and better and better at that. But it's also going to get worse and worse and worse at hitting things generally, because you're turning, right, your shot from a cannonball down to like a laser. Being laser targeted is where you get closer and closer to, okay, I'm going to spend $1 and then I'm going to get $10, $20 out of it.
What rules the C-suite, especially the CFO's behavior, is money in versus money out. However, Drew Neisser points out that it's incumbent on us to show him or her how marketing metrics tangibly impact the business. He gives a great tip on how we can drive this home in a financial context.
But if you go to a CFO and say, this is what we're spending, and it's going to impact employee retention numbers and advocacy numbers, it's going to attack customer retention numbers and advocacy numbers, and it's going to impact pipeline, it's pretty hard to sort of say, I don't want to spend that money. That's a cost. But you then work on those metrics with your CFO. Again, this is why marketing is not an island. You have all these dependencies. You've got a dependency on sales. You've got a dependency on product. You need the CFO to be your best friend.
While dollars are an input to marketing, The most essential commodity all of our campaigns use is content. John Hinderleiter calls out the fact that something has harvested and eroded our content over the past couple of years. He points out who the guilty parties are, and he offers one kind of content that we can invest in that we shouldn't see devalue.
I think it's lost value largely because we as marketers, we've created so much content, and the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Amazons of the world have taken our content and essentially stripped away any of the value. Facebook made its entire domain around the idea that it wants to keep people on Facebook. So if you went viral on Facebook, that's great, that's awesome, but then can you actually do it again? From Facebook's point of view, they don't want you to do that. They don't want to send you off the platform to go do whatever action your viral campaign is trying to create. And then they also pull back and they say, well, people are really here on Facebook for their friends and family. True. So you as the Facebook page, your brand page for your product, well, you can't reach the people, the fans that you used to be able to reach many, many years ago. So now all that organic reach, the organic reach from search, the organic reach on social, all of that impacted that. And so I think where you can find value in content now is creating dynamic, personalized content based on data.
We can do laser-like focusing. We can do personalization. These are all great tactics. But we can also get caught up with making these granular changes and having them consume everything we do. And Amit Kabra is great at reminding us of the role that we were hired for here and how we should be the master of technology, not its servant.
My notion has always been that I'm an analyst. So doing little things isn't that's not my job in my head. So having automation to kind of help with all of that is really, really great. And especially getting it to send out reports that otherwise would take me hours to do makes so much sense, because I'd rather spend my time analyzing that information than doing that work that is important, but not so important that I have to do it manually.
The next theme that came through clearly in our talks was a recasted relationship with sales. Now, some may think of how we get along with sales as too soft and squishy to take seriously, but we cannot deny that ever since March of 2020, it's become much harder for salespeople to meet buyers. Now it's marketing that knows first when a buyer wants to talk to sales. And these two departments now dance a completely new kind of tango. Rick Enderlat gives us an up-close vision of this reality.
Most of the sales folks I know, their biggest job right now is just trying to figure out how do I even connect with my prospects. Connecting is just a huge issue. And then, of course, if you do have somebody that comes to your website, or you do have somebody that's a hand raiser saying, hey, I'm interested, you need to jump on those. It's such a spread from not being able to connect to somebody, and then when somebody does want to talk to you, you need to be all over that. If you're not, you're going to lose them very quickly. So it's really important to make sure that you're at least supporting them in the buying process, and that you're all over these leads as they come in. I mean, would you rather spend time trying to contact those people in an account where where you actually can't even reach them live, or the person that says, yes, please contact me, you just ignore, right? So it's about prioritizing and making sure that you're spending your time in the best places.
Gary Emerald tells how misalignment between sales and marketing happens, and that often at the root of the problem is how the teams have chosen to define marketing qualified leads.
This narrative of sales and marketing, to extend your analogy, being in a bad marriage, right? Where the communication is not good. When you are communicating, it's just pointing fingers about why things are bad. The sad truth is it's often exactly the reality of many organizations, right? And I think largely it's a function of the misaligned incentives, right? I started at a large organization several years ago, responsible for their demand gen. And one of the first things I discovered is that the event teams had somehow finagled an arrangement where anybody who attended an event was automatically an MQL and sent over to sales, right? In what world is simply attending an event a strong enough intent signal to have a salesperson follow up, right? That salesperson is a valuable resource. They're a very expensive resource. You want them focused on things that are actually meaningful.
We absolutely should be serving sales, and we shouldn't stop at keeping sales happy. John Jantsch encourages us to consider the whole ecosystem, including outside partners, as a source for feeding leads, being fed leads, and prospective customers.
But I also spend a tremendous amount of time focused on strategic partners and co-marketing and other businesses who also have your ideal customer can actually in some cases be your greatest source of referrals because a happy customer might have 3 or 4 people they could refer to you. The right strategic partner, in my case like a software company or something that does business with small business might have hundreds of people they can expose me to.
The next theme that we're dealing with is doing more with knowing less. Now, a large factor in why we have less data, that is, to do our jobs, is privacy. And Jody Daniels shows how it's affecting everyone in our industry, including Google. She explains what Google's challenge is when it comes to complying with privacy regulations.
Google has an entire ecosystem where it had always had one universal connector across all of its products. If I was on Gmail and I stayed logged into Gmail and there was a tracker that followed me, it's very similar to some of the social media platforms. Now, when you take Google, you have Gmail, you have Drive, you have all the different actual docs, YouTube, actual search. That's a lot of information. You have an antitrust meets a privacy issue. You have parts of the world who say that Google Analytics isn't even capable of complying with GDPR. So there's this massive tension. And then you have millions of businesses from tiny to large who are all relying on some of these products. I absolutely do not have the crystal ball as to where this is going to go. How are they fixing Google Analytics? How are they fixing all these things? And what's the time frame going to be like? So all marketers genuinely have pretty much the same questions. I can assure you that this is the world we're staying in.
The ripple effect of privacy causes us to rethink who has access, including our agency partners. This is something that Amanda Farley recounts on how her own shop has handled this type of situation.
And I know I'm talking about agency side. I know internal is a little different, but we have very strict data and access protocols at the agency. So it really comes down to really putting that right team together, number one. So it's like, you don't want to have everyone on everything all the time. Like that's not even like, but part of it is making sure that you've got, if they're being plugged into a certain communication channel, the people that are supposed to be there, if you're going to share certain data, there is different ways that needs to be done, especially when you talk about customer data. That gets definitely even like a little bit more when you talk about like compliance and all of that.
There are those organizations who've put effort into building first-party audiences, and they're banding together now. As Julia Vise tells us, if our campaigns need reach, we should consider using another trusted party's audience.
I think this is the answer to everything. I think it depends. Everyone has a slightly different version of unwieldy. So if you have the time and the precision to want to put your own stamp on this, please go ahead. If you don't, and you have a couple of dollars to invest, purchase something that works. Why expand your business into also being an audience manager? And if there's harmony in between those things, if you want to just buy an audience from Visa, for example, or partner with a hotel chain or whatever the right partner is that might have an audience to introduce you to, go for it. Always knowing that you and your partner together need to manage that audience accordingly and be good actors on the internet. But ultimately, you will decide what you have the bandwidth and curiosity for. If you have a lot of time and a lot of curiosity, go ahead and build your own audiences and manage them accordingly. If you don't, then engage with one of these tools.
Now, even once we've dealt with this brave new privacy world, there are some cracks that are still showing in how marketing work gets done. The push to be uber efficient is moving so rapidly, It's brought on a restructuring in the legacy players of the marketing services industry. Leona Hobbs gives us a few examples of where their economic model is showing weakness and signs of strain.
So it's a false economy. So to get value from Fiverr, you need someone like yourself or myself sitting on top of it. And our billing rates are certainly much higher than what those individuals are making on Fiverr. I think there's a real danger around some of these types of marketing services. And not to say that you can't get good work out of people on Fiverr. I'm sure you can. But it's really taken the idea that marketing services should be quick and cheap. There's still this scarcity mindset where we're all striving to do more with less. Still, like we shouldn't still be in that position. And then just sort of sticking with the strive to do more with less. Majority of agencies are seeing their projects go over budget, right? So what does that suggest? To me, it suggests that agencies are failing to nip their spiraling costs in the bud. But also, you cannot sell the job for what it costs to deliver.
This kind of thinking can lead us, particularly with contractors, to giving narrow mandate, even though it lifts your performance, it will ultimately be damaging. And Richard Fergie recounts how this happened.
Yeah, and I'm just managing paid search, and I'm like, I want to make that number go up without making that number too big. Then, that like I've got different levers to pull, and I'm using, I don't really care. I'm not worried about like, the fixed cost versus variable costs. I'm worried about what's the conversion rate when someone goes through to that landing page.
The last theme we're going to talk about is what is made possible by AI. The answer, in short, is a lot. And I was fortunate to have Paul Reitzer give us a textbook definition about what AI is all about, which also serves as the foundation for understanding what kind of unintended consequences we can get when we don't understand how to use AI.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, one way to think about artificial intelligence is it makes predictions. It's trying to predict human behavior. It's trying to predict things that you would like or that would get you to take an action. And so that is pervasive in every application of marketing. We're trying to predict outcomes and human behavior. And so that was my early instinct with AI was, well, it's just making predictions about outcomes. That is, you hear about like artificial intelligence, sort of this broad, sounds sort of technical and sci-fi. So that's what happens within all these applications we use, from Gmail to Netflix to Spotify. It's just making predictions, but it does it at like a superhuman speed. And it doesn't have a limit of how much data it can take in to improve those predictions. And that's kind of the core of what AI enables.
The impact of AI is undeniable. And Brett Surgenson thinks it'll actually change the marketing team's composition. They have to react to this shift in capabilities AI brings.
We're essentially doing the same thing. We're analyzing the data. At the end of the day, you want to get as accurate data as possible. And to do so, you're only as good as, first of all, you're only as good as your data. And I think your marketing team is only as good as your data scientists. And everybody just thinks that marketing is about coming up with great ideas. I think it's becoming more about data, especially as we're getting more and more data these days.
But one thing that's great about AI tools is how they are now giving practical help to marketers. You don't have to be a data scientist to understand how to use them. Kathy McPhillips points out that she uses them every day and that she gets to decide the tasks that she gives AI and those that she keeps for herself.
So it's just finding these things that we're doing that are saving us time. Would I love to have Persado for all of our writing, for Drift for all of our conversational AI, for Market Muse for all these things? Oh my gosh, absolutely. But I have this opportunity to take all these smaller tools like Copy.ai, Descript, and test them out and learn what I really need AI to help me with. Because I'm doing all these different things, but what do I enjoy doing? What is taking me so much time? What am I doing the same thing every single month? How can AI help me with some of those tasks?
So looking back on the key themes of 2022 that will continue to impact us in 2023, every one of us can take away something to work on. It could be anything from analytics to generating revenue to sales interactions to privacy concerns and even to AI. I can't thank them enough. As for where this show is going, well, I have a no show about the show policy, but I'll take a second and give you a quick peek to know the great topics that we've got on the way. Starting with the next show, we're into our winter installment of our book series, and this batch is going to be focused on product management. Next year, we're going to dip into marketing books each and every season. There's going to be some great authors coming up, some you've heard of, and others that you should get to know. What else is coming? Well, the answer to that is going to take your help. I focus the show on whatever you want to hear about. Use any channel you can to find me, to give me feedback, show ideas, guests that you recommend. I love hearing from you. So to wrap up, thanks for making it to the end of show 124 with me. I hope this gave you better insight into your funnel so you can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.